So how did a marriage that survived decades of intense public scrutiny reach a point of such severe internal lockdown? The answer lies in the quiet, calculating machinery of the palace. King Charles waited until the evening staff had entirely vacated the premises before summoning Camilla to a private sitting room inside Windsor Castle. No aides stood nearby to offer assistance. No private secretary remained stationed outside the door to manage the fallout. Windsor Castle is not just a weekend home, it is one of the sovereign's principal headquarters, carrying immense constitutional weight. Therefore, inner access to its corridors is never granted casually. The sheer silence of the empty room told Camilla immediately that this meeting had moved far beyond the boundaries of a standard marital disagreement. She sat across from him, her eyes fixed on his hand resting deliberately beside the sealed order. Charles did not delay the inevitable. He spoke with a directness that left no room for interpretation, informing her that her unrestricted access was being revoked across the board. He outlined the new parameters of her existence within the walls. She could, of course, still attend approved public engagements and official state ceremonies. However, the private apartments, the highly restricted historical corridors, the royal family archives, and the secured chapel rooms would now strictly require written authorization. Understand what royal household authorization actually means in practice. It is formal permission issued directly through the king's senior security staff. This protocol meant that the Queen herself would now be treated, logged, and monitored as a controlled visitor within her own primary residence. Camilla did not move a muscle. She did not speak. When Charles plainly explained that every personal key she possessed had to be surrendered before the stroke of midnight, her fingers instinctively reached toward the sealed order on the table, and then abruptly stopped. She looked at him as though she expected the harsh sentence to suddenly change, hoping for a familiar flicker of the man who had always defended her. It did not come. When she finally broke the silence, her question was brief. She asked if this restriction was temporary. Charles simply answered, "No. Okay, stay with me, because this is where the power dynamic completely shifts." The king deliberately kept his voice low, and that absolute calmness cut much deeper than any flash of sudden anger ever could. He offered her no promise of a future review. He provided no private exception to the new rules, nor did he offer any comforting phrase to protect her shattered pride. The decision had already been fully entered into the palace's electronic security system. Replacement instructions had already been issued to the royal protection officers stationed at every checkpoint. Her current access codes were programmed to permanently expire at midnight, and the household command had been explicitly warned against granting any exceptions, regardless of who was asking. The shock turned entirely colder when Charles revealed that this severe action was not a hasty punishment for a single, isolated misunderstanding. He methodically listed the infractions. Private rooms had been entered without consent. Unauthorized visitors had been allowed far too close to highly sensitive zones. A confidential area had been crossed after a clear and documented warning was previously given. Having laid out the facts, Charles rose from his chair, left the sealed order resting on the table between them, and walked toward the heavy oak door. Camilla remained seated in the quiet room, because the written decree was only the beginning of her sudden isolation. Behind the ink on that page was the specific incident that had finally convinced her husband she could no longer be trusted to roam freely inside Windsor. But before she could even begin to challenge the logistics of the order, she had to confront a far more painful psychological truth. This devastating decision had been finalized by the one person whose absolute confidence she genuinely believed she would never lose. For the British public, Windsor Castle has always represented continuity, grand ceremony, and royal permanence. But for Charles and Camilla, the ancient stone fortress carried something much more intimate. It represented years of shared history, fragile loyalties tested by fire, and desperate promises made after decades of relentless media scrutiny. Now, those exact same walls had instantly become a hard, unyielding boundary between them. The king was actively defending the institution of the crown, while his wife was suddenly fighting to preserve her hard-earned place beside him. Neither of them could pretend anymore that this drastic decision was purely about physical security. Listen closely to what happened next. Camilla remained entirely alone in the sitting room long after Charles departed, listening to the crushing silence he had purposefully created. Windsor is not simply another royal residence. It is one of the monarchy's most critical command centers. It is a place permanently tied to the sovereign's constitutional duty, the deep history of the bloodline, and national continuity. For the king, those specific locked rooms carried the heavy memory of his late mother, Queen Elizabeth II, and the immense, unspoken burden of protecting everything she had left behind. Trust inside those specific walls is never personal. It is absolute, or it does not exist at all. Camilla, however, understood the geography of Windsor completely differently. For years, she had lived under harsh judgment, watched closely by a global public that once entirely refused to accept her presence. Moving freely through the castle's most restricted corridors had become her daily proof that she was no longer standing at the dangerous edge of royal life. She had fought tooth and nail to earn a place near the very center of the monarchy. Now, in the span of a single evening, that center felt terrifyingly uncertain again. Slowly, the Queen Consort reached into her leather handbag and withdrew a small, unassuming Windsor key. She placed it carefully on the wooden table right beside the sealed order. The sound of the metal hitting the wood was faint, but the underlying meaning was entirely brutal. This was not just a piece of brass being returned to the master of the house. It was her long-sought acceptance being aggressively taken back. Meanwhile, in another wing of the estate, Charles stood in his private office with the master security order open before him. The final paragraph already carried his signature, yet his hand remained pressed firmly against the page. As a husband, he knew he could still tear the document apart. He could still intervene to protect his wife from the inevitable embarrassment of being questioned by her own security detail. But as a sovereign, the king knew that shielding Camilla emotionally could leave the entire monarchy exposed to a fatal breach of protocol. A husband might easily forgive a trespass, but a ruling monarch simply cannot ignore a documented risk. The situation rapidly escalated, and Camilla's deep sadness sharpened into acute paranoia when a loyal private aide quietly confirmed a devastating detail. Prince William had been fully briefed on the security changes long before she ever entered the sitting room. The Prince of Wales had not actively demanded the restriction, nor had he openly cheered for its implementation, but the future king's early, quiet involvement in the matter changed the entire landscape of the dispute. Succession planning within the royal family means constantly preparing the monarchy for the next reign, ensuring no vulnerabilities are passed down. William's undeniable presence in the architecture of this decree suggested that this situation was vastly larger than a bitter dispute between a husband and a wife. Then, Camilla noticed something else hidden in the revised security protocol that had been left for her. Another name was listed. Princess Catherine would officially keep her unrestricted access to several key family rooms that were now explicitly closed to the Queen Consort. The Princess of Wales remained a trusted entity in the very spaces where Camilla had just been heavily restricted. That specific detail cut the deepest. Camilla quickly began to understand that the ultimate authority inside Windsor Castle was being quietly, systematically rearranged right in front of her. Charles was not just closing physical doors, he was actively deciding who would stand closest to the power of the crown during the most fragile, transitional stage of his current reign. The deeper she searched her memory for a logical explanation for this sudden excommunication, the more every single path led directly back to one specific evening. It all traced back to the exact moment Windsor's private boundaries were blatantly crossed, and the king's famous patience finally snapped. So what exactly triggered this unprecedented lockdown? The final decision did not begin with a dry legal briefing or a routine palace security review. It began exactly 3 weeks earlier, immediately following a highly private memorial service held inside the walls of St. George's Chapel. As the rest of the senior royal family departed the solemn event, Camilla purposefully remained behind in the shadows. She quietly entered a restricted, heavily monitored corridor, leading directly toward a suite of rooms that had been firmly sealed since the late Queen's death. What happened in the dark next lasted for less than 20 minutes. But by the time King Charles learned the absolute truth of those 20 minutes, the structural damage to his trust was entirely irreversible. Let's look at the exact timeline of that day. Charles had attended the chapel service standing right beside Camilla, William, Catherine, and Princess Anne. The gathering marked a deeply private family anniversary and had been strictly kept away from the probing lenses of the press cameras. Only a very small handful of senior clergy members and intensely trusted, vetted staff were allowed to be present. St. George's Chapel is not just a building, it is the official royal church located securely inside the perimeter of Windsor. It is utilized exclusively for the most important family ceremonies, royal weddings, and historic burials, making the occasion intensely personal and emotionally charged for everyone in attendance. When the service concluded, Camilla lingered behind after the other royals began their procession toward the exits. The royal protection officers on duty had already been given strict standing orders to keep the East Passage completely closed off. This specific corridor was locked down because the rooms sitting just beyond it still contained highly sensitive personal effects, private diplomatic letters, and sacred devotional items belonging directly to Queen Elizabeth II. Those specific rooms had not yet been formally catalogued by the National Archivists. In royal terms, this meant their contents had not been fully recorded, vetted for historical sensitivity, or approved for any level of external access. Approaching the checkpoint, Camilla looked directly at a junior equerry and told him that King Charles had personally asked her to retrieve something specific from the sealed area. For context, an equerry is a senior military officer acting as a royal aide, tasked with assisting the monarch with official and private logistical duties. Relying entirely on the weight of her title and her previously unrestricted access, she bypassed the junior officer. She passed straight through the locked corridor and confidently entered the late Queen's private prayer room, entirely without the King's knowledge or authorization. But the palace is a place where secrets rarely survive the hour. Princess Anne returned to the chapel area mere moments later to collect a specific remembrance card she had accidentally left behind after the service. The Princess Royal immediately noticed that the heavy door to the restricted East Passage was standing slightly ajar. Walking silently down the hall, Anne found Camilla standing completely still near a marked, catalogued cabinet, holding a small, unidentified velvet case in her hands. The confrontation was immediate. Anne asked, with icy precision, exactly who had given her permission to be inside that room. Camilla did not flinch, and she notably did not lower the velvet case. She looked back at the king's sister and confidently answered that she did not need to seek permission to move through the halls of her own residence. Now, watch this. The Princess Royal did not raise her voice, nor did she argue the point. She simply stepped forward, used her own hand to firmly close the open cabinet door, and delivered a reality check that echoed through the empty room. Anne replied that Windsor Castle belonged entirely to the crown, long before it ever belonged to any one individual person. The heavy silence that instantly fell between the two women carried significantly more force than shouting ever could. The lines of war were drawn, not with screaming, but with the cold, immovable weight of royal protocol. The fallout from that encounter was swift. Charles learnt exactly what had transpired through a highly documented classified security report delivered directly to his desk later that same evening. The palace's internal electronic logging system showed absolutely no formal request originating from the king. There was no retrieval order filed. There was zero authorized reason for Camilla to ever cross that threshold. Worse still, the detailed report recorded that one of Camilla's own private assistants had been asking pointed questions about the specific contents of that exact room just 2 days earlier. The king sat alone in his study and read the security report twice. He slowly removed his reading glasses, set them down beside the thick file, and said absolutely nothing for several long minutes. He then picked up the encrypted phone, called his senior private secretary, and quietly instructed him to begin preparing permanent access restrictions for the Queen Consort. Charles actively chose strict operational procedure over a messy emotional confrontation. He laid the trap, and Camilla knew absolutely nothing about it until the trap was finally sprung. Yet, when she finally realized exactly which specific incident had permanently condemned her status, her initial disbelief rapidly hardened into defensive anger. She immediately demanded the direct confrontation that Charles had so deliberately tried to postpone. She was not going to go quietly. Camilla did not wait for another formal, polite summons to his office. Early the very next morning, before the palace clock struck and her old access codes could officially expire on the network, she stormed across the private gallery and entered Charles's heavily guarded study, entirely without a scheduled appointment. The king was already standing silently beside his large oak desk when she aggressively placed the surrendered Windsor key directly in front of him. What followed in that room was not a measured discussion between a reigning monarch and his loyal consort. It was a raw, unfiltered confrontation between a husband who felt deeply betrayed by deception and a wife who firmly believed she had been intentionally and publicly humiliated in front of the household staff. Camilla had reached the inner study just seconds before the new, draconian security rules took full, electronic effect. A royal protection officer had actually paused at the study door, visibly unsure whether her old security clearance still applied, or if he should physically block her path. These protection officers are highly trained, elite staff members strictly responsible for the physical safety and the controlled, scheduled movement of all senior family members. Charles saw the officer's hesitation from across the room and gave a slight nod, allowing her inside. He knew that forcing another delay or having her physically stopped in the hallway would only make the institutional damage infinitely worse. The metal key struck the polished surface of the desk with a small, hard sound that seemed to echo in the quiet room. Camilla stood tall and stared directly at Charles, waiting for him to reach out and pick it up. He did not move. That simple piece of metal had once meant ultimate trust, total acceptance, and absolute freedom inside the walls of Windsor. Now it had instantly become physical proof that years of struggling for belonging could be completely reduced to one hastily withdrawn privilege. Camilla's anger broke the silence first. She directly accused Charles of quietly warning William, Anne, Catherine, and a network of senior courtiers long before ever having the courage to speak to his own wife. Courtiers are the deeply trusted, influential members of the royal household who help manage the intricate official and private duties of the monarchy, and Camilla knew their gossip could destroy her authority. She pointedly told the king that he had cowardly protected himself from internal criticism by willingly sacrificing her personal dignity. Charles did not take a single step back. The king stood his ground and clearly stated the facts. He reminded her that she had knowingly entered a sealed, restricted room. She had deliberately used his sovereign name without an ounce of permission to bypass security. And worst of all, she had actively involved a junior member of her own staff in the premeditated deception. Camilla fired back, her voice shaking with betrayal, replying that he had ultimately chosen the cold institution of the crown over her. Charles met her gaze and delivered a devastating response, stating simply that she had forced him to make that exact choice. Cornered by the truth, Camilla then aggressively turned her anger toward Princess Anne. She wildly claimed that the Princess Royal had been patiently waiting for years for any opportunity to weaken her position within the family, and had eagerly used the minor chapel incident to finally strike a fatal blow. Charles rejected the baseless accusation immediately and absolutely. The monarch calmly explained that the unbiased electronic security record, and not his sister's personal word, had made the restriction decision entirely unavoidable. Anne had merely discovered physically what the digital system later proved definitively. Then, Charles revealed the hidden truth that Camilla had absolutely not expected to hear. He informed her that the chapel breach was not her first warning, nor was it the only incident on her growing file. He revealed that weeks earlier, a private guest directly connected to her own inner circle had been secretly taken through an unapproved, unmonitored side entrance during a supposedly private family weekend. The king explained that the initial matter had been quietly contained by security to protect her reputation, but this second blatant incident in the chapel had permanently ended any remaining chance of forgiveness or leniency. Camilla instantly fell silent. The fight completely drained out of her as she realized the extent of the surveillance against her. Charles finally reached out, lifted the surrendered key from the desk, placed it carefully inside a wooden drawer, and closed it shut. The argument was officially over. The access was gone, yet the massive institutional decision had not been shaped by the king alone, because while Charles had been the one to deliver the final judgment to his wife, the complex machinery behind the lockdown had been carefully assembled by another senior royal figure, a figure whose quiet influence over the future of Windsor was growing at a rapid, unstoppable pace. The restriction order carried Charles's official signature at the bottom of the page, but its entire architecture bore Prince William's ruthless caution. As the direct heir to the British throne, the Prince of Wales had recently spent months meticulously reviewing exactly how the royal residences would function during anticipated periods of illness, sovereign transition, or sudden national emergency. Windsor Castle sat at the very heart of all those strategic survival plans. When William was securely shown the digital evidence that private access rules were being treated as entirely optional by the Queen Consort, he did not storm into a room and demand immediate punishment. He did something significantly more powerful and vastly more dangerous. He calmly presented the king with a series of constitutional consequences that Charles could no longer afford to dismiss. William had recently taken on a much wider, authoritative role in palace security planning, internal household coordination, and critical continuity arrangements. Continuity planning is a serious governmental protocol. It means preparing the entire machinery of the monarchy to keep functioning flawlessly if the reigning sovereign suddenly becomes ill, unavailable, or unable to direct national events. Windsor mattered above all else because it was designed to serve as a family home, a grand ceremonial centre, and a highly protected, fortified command location, all at the exact same time. The prince saw a danger that was much larger than Camilla's personal ego. He recognized that unchecked personal access had begun to dangerously overlap with strict constitutional responsibility, and that specific blur made every single security exception a massive risk to the crown. William firmly believed that entry to the most protected areas of the monarchy should depend entirely on official, documented duty. It should never rely on marriage, personal affection, or private influence behind closed doors. He argued that one weak rule tolerated today would inevitably become a massive, uncontainable crisis tomorrow. William had actually paused outside Charles's office door just before their crucial planning meeting. He had quietly rehearsed the difficult words, knowing full well that they possessed the power to deeply wound his father. The future king genuinely respected the marriage and understood the emotional toll this would take. But William also knew that maintaining his own silence would mean actively protecting a fragile family peace at the direct expense of the crown's long-term security. During that meeting, Charles had listened intently and then slowly closed the classified security file. The king had argued back, stating that heavily restricting Camilla's movements would undoubtedly look cruel, petty, and deeply personal to the outside world. He reminded his son that she had spent years enduring abuse to earn public acceptance, and this harsh decision could easily make her appear openly rejected and isolated by her own husband. But William did not soften his answer, nor did he back down from the grim reality of the situation. He looked directly at his father and firmly reminded him that 2 severe security breaches had already occurred under their watch, and a third could not be risked. The fortress had to be secured, no matter the emotional cost to the family inside it. The line had been firmly drawn in the stone of Windsor Castle, and the Queen Consort was officially standing on the outside of it. If you found this breakdown revealing, make sure to hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to Prime Royal Central. We have much more coming on exactly how Prince William is taking control, so turn on your notifications, and we will see you in the next part of this royal crisis. Camilla learned the harsh truth through a private briefing from one of her senior aides. She discovered that William had presented the constitutional argument that ultimately changed Charles's mind. Her initial hurt immediately sharpened into deep suspicion. That suspicion spread quickly through Camilla's entire household, and within hours, the first visible consequences of the king's order began systematically stripping away the life she had taken for granted. At exactly midnight, the order became an undeniable reality. There was no formal announcement, no ceremonial handover, and absolutely no public explanation. A green light on Camilla's private Windsor pass simply turned red. Staff members across the estate received revised instructions. Locks were physically recoded. Rooms she had entered freely the previous week were suddenly placed far beyond her reach. The most devastating consequence was not merely that the Queen had lost access, it was that dozens of people were now actively required to witness that loss. Protection officers updated the entry lists before dawn. They deliberately removed Camilla from automatic overnight clearance and placed every single official visit directly under the King's household. Automatic clearance means permission granted without a fresh check each time. From now on, she would need explicit approval before entering areas that had once opened to her without question. Camilla's personal staff felt the abrupt change almost as quickly as she did. 2 members of the Queen Consort's private office lost their independent entry rights entirely. Clothing, personal belongings, and official materials could only be collected under strict supervision. The restriction had moved beyond targeting one woman. It had begun aggressively cutting through her entire household operations. Listen to how this played out in the physical world. Camilla arrived later that day for a scheduled luncheon and instinctively presented her old pass at the private entrance. The digital reader flashed red. A young officer looked down at the machine, then back up at her. He asked the Queen to wait while authorization was formally confirmed. She said absolutely nothing. The officer respectfully apologized, but that apology only deepened the intense humiliation, because both of them clearly understood that he was following Charles's direct order. Camilla entered several minutes later with her head held high. She walked past the watching staff without a single complaint and reached a small dressing room before her composure finally broke. The Queen Consort removed her gloves, sat completely alone, and whispered that she had become a guest in her husband's home. The structural damage widened again when an aide informed her that her private Windsor suite was currently under review. Rooms once entirely reserved for her would remain firmly locked whenever she was absent. Several personal items would be transferred to Clarence House, her London residence, clearly suggesting that even overnight stays could soon require special approval. Desperate to maintain a fraction of her former autonomy, Camilla made one final request. In a handwritten note, she asked Charles to simply let her keep access to a private garden entrance. The king read the message, folded it once, and told his secretary that granting one exception would destroy the purpose of every other restriction. Camilla prepared to leave the estate in total silence. Then Princess Anne entered the corridor alone. She did not pass by. She abruptly stopped and asked for 5 minutes entirely without aides, officers, or family intermediaries present. For the first time since the crisis began, Camilla would face someone who neither feared her title nor needed Charles's permission to speak with brutal honesty. There were no official advisors in the room, no security files resting on the table, and no king standing between them. Princess Anne firmly closed the door and faced Camilla alone. For years, the two women had maintained a highly disciplined royal peace, characterized by formal smiles, measured conversations, and carefully protected personal boundaries. Now every single layer of protocol had been stripped away. Anne had not come to celebrate the Queen's recent humiliation. She had come to explain exactly why Charles's decision had become unavoidable. Anne chose a modest morning room instead of a formal office. The Princess Royal, the title traditionally given to the sovereign's eldest daughter, wanted no witnesses and no official palace record of this exchange. She clearly told Camilla that the conversation would never be repeated by her, no matter how painful it became. Camilla remained highly guarded. She directly asked whether Anne had wanted her permanently removed from Windsor from the very beginning. The Queen Consort fully expected a polite denial, but the answer was remarkably sharper. Anne stated she wanted the late Queen's private rooms protected, and she would have challenged William, Charles, or anyone else who crossed that boundary without permission. Anne then admitted something Camilla had never expected to hear. She had not found it easy to accept her place in the family. Yet, the princess also recognized the years of service, the intense public hostility, and the humiliation she had endured beside Charles. Camilla had fought hard to become accepted, and Windsor had ultimately become the physical symbol of that victory. "That is exactly why losing the key hurts so much," Anne said. Camilla immediately looked away. Anne told her the severe restriction felt like exile because unrestricted access had become her core proof that she belonged. But fighting the official order would only create a much worse impression. It would suggest to the institution that personal status mattered more to her than trust, and that personal pride mattered more than the crown's overall safety. Anne then revealed the crucial detail Charles had deliberately kept private. During a recorded conversation with his private secretary, the king had actually delayed signing the final decree for 2 full days. He had repeatedly asked whether a stern warning would be enough. Only the second unauthorized entry record definitively convinced him that marital loyalty could no longer erase institutional risk. Camilla's defensive anger finally weakened. After a long, heavy silence, she admitted that she had used Charles's name because she genuinely believed her high position entitled her to know what was inside the sealed room. For the very first time, she actively stopped blaming William, Anne, and the palace officials for her current predicament. The princess did not offer any false comfort. Windsor access might never return, she stated, but dignity still could. Camilla made her definitive choice in that moment. She would not challenge the decree publicly. Instead, she asked for a private meeting with Charles, not to try and reverse the judgment, but to admit exactly why he had made it. That quiet admission drastically changed the internal crisis. But before Charles and Camilla could even begin to repair what remained between them, the hidden lockdown order escaped the palace walls and became a massive national sensation. By sunrise, a highly private restriction had morphed into the defining royal story of the day. The nation obviously did not see the classified security files, the sealed corridor, or the painful hushed conversations behind closed doors. It saw one unforgettable, damning detail. The Queen's Windsor pass had flashed red. That single, vivid image instantly transformed a complicated constitutional security decision into a massive public symbol of rejection. Loyal supporters called it necessary accountability. Vocal critics called it unnecessary humiliation. Inside the palace walls, Charles knew that silence could no longer contain the sprawling consequences. The explosive story spread across television, radio, digital outlets, and every single major morning newspaper. Palace communications flatly refused to discuss private security arrangements, meaning the rules controlling access to protected royal spaces. That official silence was originally meant to defend the integrity of Windsor, but it only made the public significantly more curious. Charles watched the intense media coverage completely alone in his breakfast room. A prominent broadcaster called the restriction the most personal boundary of his entire reign. The king lowered the volume, yet he deliberately did not turn off the screen. He had successfully defended the crown, but now millions of people were openly judging what that strict defense had actually cost his wife. Public opinion divided almost instantly. Some openly praised Charles for finally proving that no one, not even Camilla, stood above royal security protocols. Others heavily argued that the Queen Consort had been publicly diminished and that the monarchy's carefully crafted image of unity had visibly cracked under pressure. Despite the uproar, Camilla completely refused to disappear. Her senior advisors urgently urged her to cancel a scheduled afternoon engagement, explicitly warning that every single movement and facial expression would be ruthlessly examined by the press. She rejected the advice immediately. The Queen firmly told them that hiding would make her look ashamed of a decision she had ultimately chosen to accept. Outside Windsor Castle, a large crowd gathered near the Henry V gate. Newspaper sellers actively held up a front page, showing the castle entrance beneath 4 brutal words. The Queen locked out. One woman standing in the crowd quietly observed that the crown had finally placed duty above marriage. Camilla arrived at her afternoon engagement fully knowing the inevitable question would come. A reporter loudly asked whether she still felt welcome at Windsor. "The king has acted to protect the crown, and I respect his decision," she answered calmly. That single sentence changed everything. Camilla notably did not attack Charles, blame William, or question Anne in front of the cameras. She effectively ended the appearance of open family warfare with one composed statement. The Queen Consort had lost her unrestricted access, but she entirely refused to lose control of the public story. Charles watched the recorded clip twice. The monarch heard absolutely no bitterness in her voice, and saw no passive attempt to weaken his sovereign judgment. For the very first time since the crisis began, he believed that trust might not be completely destroyed after all. That evening, Charles requested one final private meeting, not to return the surrendered key, but to determine whether trust could truly survive after the privilege had been forcefully taken away. The brass Windsor key was still firmly locked inside Charles's desk. When Camilla returned to the study for their final conversation, she knew it would not be offered back, and the king knew she had not come to demand its return. The crisis had successfully moved beyond locked doors, digital passes, and private rooms. It had fundamentally become a severe test of whether their marriage could actually survive a rigid boundary imposed by the crown. This time, neither party entered the room, prepared to loudly accuse the other. Charles waited in the exact same private room where the order had first been delivered. Camilla took the exact same chair, but the sealed decree was now entirely gone. A decree is a formal decision issued by royal authority, and its absence made the room feel slightly less official, though no less final. Only the surrendered key remained as the elephant in the room. Camilla spoke first. She openly admitted that entering the late Queen's private room under false authorization had been entirely wrong. The Queen Consort did not blame Anne, William, palace officials, or the immense pressure surrounding her high position. She told Charles that she had dangerously confused closeness to the sovereign with an inherent right to cross boundaries that existed for a very specific reason. Charles listened carefully without interrupting her once. Then the king firmly confirmed that the security decision would remain permanent. Camilla could still enter Windsor for official duties, family occasions, and approved stays, but the restricted apartments, royal archives, and sealed rooms would permanently remain outside her independent authority. The truth still hurt. Charles openly admitted that he had allowed others to prepare the restriction before speaking directly to Camilla. The monarch completely understood why that specific action had felt like a coordinated ambush, and exactly why the resulting public consequences had deeply worsened her humiliation. He sincerely apologized for the pain he caused, but he definitively did not apologize for protecting Windsor. Camilla accepted the crucial difference between the two. Charles reached across the table and took her hand. He pointedly left the key untouched. That single choice defined exactly what remained between them going forward. She was still his wife. She remained Queen Consort, the title held by the wife of a reigning king. But marriage would no longer create automatic, unquestioned power over every protected space belonging to the crown. Camilla stood up when the conversation ended. She looked once at the small brass key resting on the desk, then turned toward the heavy door. Charles walked over and opened it for her himself. She did not look back, and he did not call her back. Both of them perfectly understood that the judgment was forever settled. Camilla had lost unrestricted Windsor access, but she had not lost her marriage, her title, or her years of dedicated service. Charles had successfully proved that his duty could reach even those standing closest to him. She had recovered her personal dignity by finally accepting responsibility instead of blindly demanding privilege. The key remained permanently inside the king's desk, but the monarchy emerged from the crisis with its critical boundary restored, its authority clarified, and its hardest lesson fully understood. Love may stand beside the crown, but it can never be permitted to rule in its place. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Prime Royal Central, and we will see you in the next breakdown of Palace Secrets.